morning, Dan and Amy. So we've talked about the protests that are expected tomorrow in Berkeley when Ann Coulter speaks from the public square. We talked about the P-Hat Posse in Springfield, the big protest march that went off like a pop gun. I mean, nobody showed up.
Looking at photographs, it didn't look like there were 100 people. It looked like there were 12 people there, maybe 13, a baker's dozen at the most.
Well, there were 100 people who stormed the lobby of the Heritage Foundation in D.C. yesterday, a organization called the People's Lobby, which, of course, is Chicago-based. Of course it is. The epicenter of professional agitation and community organizing here, the Windy City. And Chicago-based, so I don't know if convicted felon Creamy Bob and his wife, Calamity Janchikowski, were behind this or not. I don't know if they have alibis. But I'm just going to go ahead and assume they were because he's a convicted felon and she's a communist. So
okay,
that's good enough for me. For more on this little contretemps in D.C., we're pleased to be joined by Melissa Quinn, who is a reporter for the Daily Signal. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So these protesters came to the Heritage Foundation because they had carefully reviewed the fiscal year 2017-2018 budget plan that the Heritage Foundation put together, and they had some disagreements about entitlement reform. Is that what we're led to believe?
I'm actually not quite sure. So the Daily Signal is affiliated with the Heritage Foundation, so naturally this is the office that we work out of. And yeah, you're correct, about 200 protesters came into the lobby and staged about a demonstration that lasted about an hour. Now, the one thing that we do know is that they were protesting, like you mentioned, Heritage's budget blueprint, which is called Blueprint for Balance. They put one out in 2016 and 2017. And this is the document that President Trump adopted parts of these recommendations from in his own budget for 2018. Now, the reason why I say I don't actually know which parts of the budget they were opposed to is because these protests and activists absolutely refused to speak to me as a reporter and our video team and answer questions about why they were protesting, which programs, which recommendations, which parts of the budget they disagreed with, which changes they would like to see made. We approached several people, probably half a dozen different protesters, and every single one of them said that they were not authorized to speak to the media, and any attempt to find and track someone down who was authorized to speak to the media, unfortunately, was to no avail.
That makes me think that they're paid protesters.
You don't think it's
I mean, really. I mean, you see signs of a budget for immigrants. I'm looking at some of the video here that was taken, and not one of them would give you answer any of your questions?
Right. I mean, they kept on chanting about things that water, not walls, which was, I believe, a vague reference to the Dakota Access Pipeline, and some of the signs hit on immigration, healthy communities, which I would assume is a knock on Heritage's stance on the Affordable Care Act. But it was very difficult. Yeah, you would think that when you have a group of 200 people who come into the lobby of a think tank and want to protest that think tank's stance and one of their, big budget documents, they would be able to pinpoint exactly which aspects they disagreed with. But as far as we could tell, no one could answer that question for us.
Well, as I saw some of the tweeting from the People's Lobby, and of course, it all boils down to the fact that they're pro-human and you're pro-corporate, whatever that means.
I think it's interesting, too. I mean, Heritage is very transparent in terms of the information put out there, and I believe it's less than 3%. I may not have that exactly right, but it's a very, very small percentage of Heritage's donors actually come from corporations or different businesses. It's very much donations from individuals. But again, had that been something that these protesters would have said and wanted to discuss, we would have been more than happy. I would have been more than happy to interview them about their concerns about the organization, but it just didn't come to fruition.
Now, just to clarify, those individual donations, those are from individual humans?
Humans, yes.
Humans,
correct.
okay. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify so I could respond to the People's Lobby when they come to our lobby. By the way, not that they believe in such things, but is the Heritage Foundation, that is on private property, isn't
Right,
it? So
that's
they
what-
don't really have a right to be there.
Yes, correct.
So was security called, and did any of you fear for your safety at any time?
We have an awesome security team at Heritage. They were very visible and present and active in monitoring the situation. The organization, which as best as we could tell, this was organized through a group called People's Action, which, like you mentioned earlier, is Chicago-based and is affiliated with a larger group called National People's Action. They also had people who were designated as police liaisons to work with Capitol Police, who ended up showing up, I believe, just for crowd control, making sure that everything was somewhat peaceful. There were no disruptions. The interesting thing, though, that I think is fascinating is National People's Action, which, like I mentioned, is based in Chicago, actually protested in Chicago at the Bank of America building last month, came out and protested once again against Heritage's Blueprint for Balance, President Trump's budget, and also protested a member of Heritage's Board of Trustees, Anthony Saliba. And that took place just last month and was put on by another affiliate of National People's Action. So this certainly is not the first time that this organization has been involved and helped orchestrate protests against Heritage and President Trump's budget.
Yeah, the bank the protest in Chicago, that's where they busted out the Bank of America window.
Oh,
Because
Yes,
yeah, it's
and
right.
I believe several people were arrested as well.
Yeah. Now, did you see a communist member of Congress, her convicted felon husband? Were they milling about anywhere? You may not have immediately recognized them because they like to wear Karl Marx glasses. Some people wear Groucho Marx glasses. For these two, it's Karl Marx glasses. Did you see any members of Congress or former inmates that are associated with them?
I did not, but in terms of the event that was that this protest was part of, this was part of a 3-day convention that was taking place here in D.C., protesting Trump and Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And at that convention, attendees heard Senator Bernie Sanders speak, Senator Jeff Merkley, Van Jones, who's a political activist, and right after they left the Heritage Foundation, the protesters were headed to a Lutheran church on Capitol Hill, where they were going to hear Congressman Keith Ellison from
Sure.
Minnesota.
Oh, of course,
There you
sure,
go.
yeah. Now, did
Were
you?
they at any point in time were they given free lunch, or were they bussed from one location to the
Because
other?
they believe there is such a thing as a free lunch, right?
I know that they were bused from the White House, where they were protesting first yesterday morning, over to Heritage, but I think they just walked over to the church from there. But I unfortunately didn't get to see inside the church, so I'm not quite sure about the lunch part.
Did you have to get a hazmat team to come into the Heritage Foundation to clean up the area where they were in after their departure?
Not that I know of. I think once the protests cleared out, everything was pretty much business as usual.
All right. She is Melissa Quinn, reporter for the Daily Signal. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.